and welcome to my channel. My name is Nats and this is my little corner of the internet where I like to talk about all things knitting, all things cross stitch, all things allotment related as well, if everybody knows what allotment is. And yeah, I wanted to do a slightly different video to the ones that I've posted previously. So if you are a returning viewer, it's great to have you back, thank you. And you know, if you are new and you have not seen me before, hopefully this is going to be something that you find useful for one, but also interesting to watch. So if it is, then why not consider subscribing and doing all of those bell notifications, and you know how it goes. Anyway, today I thought we could knit together. So maybe grab a project. I have one here, and grab a drink. I have one here. I don't know if that's YouTube friendly. I don't know, but it's Saturday. Why wouldn't I? So the reason I wanted to do something slightly different, if you haven't seen any of my other posted videos yet, does it make me really old if I call them videos? They're not technically videos. I mean, are they? I don't really know what the technical term is. But okay, well, you know, I am really old. You all know what I mean though. Anywho, I have been knitting since the pandemic, and I would consider myself still a real beginner knitter. I would consider myself that. I appreciate that anybody who has not knitted before might know that I knit and think that I'm maybe the only person they know that knits. But I was still absolutely thrilled yesterday when I got a message from a friend who has recently started knitting, and she wanted a sock pattern that she could give a go. And I am a prolific sock knitter, and I love doing them. But I was like, is this it? Like, has it happened? Am I officially a knitter? Like, if people are coming to me for advice, do I know things? And I think I do about socks, not about most other things, but I think I do know things about socks. So I thought, why not do a video and share what I know? Because if you are a new knitter, and I started knitting socks quite early on in my knitting journey, just because I just thought, well, they look great. They look like a small project that I can 100% take places, and who doesn't want a lovely squishy pair of woolly socks, right? So yeah, I've been knitting them from fairly early on, and as a result, they've taught me a lot of things. So this video is going to be all about the 10 things that sock knitting has taught me as a knitter. So let's just dive straight in, and I'll go for the first one. So the first big one, I suppose, when it comes to socks is that it taught me to knit in the round. So everything that I'd been doing up until that point had been very much knitted flat. So I'd had a dabble with watching some YouTube, you know what I mean, YouTube tutorials. There we go, got there in the end. And I found that because I could watch, I wasn't following like a written pattern. I was just following the instructions, which was great. But a lot of it was knitted flat. It wasn't knitted in the round. So I was doing kind of, you know, sort of hats that were seamed, and I did attempt sort of like a half cardigan, half jumper. It was a backwards cardigan. Weirdly, it sort of buttoned up at the back, but I suppose it was probably more like the construction of a cardigan than a jumper. Anyway, again, all knitted flat, all seamed, which I didn't enjoy, I'm not going to lie. But the idea of knitting in the round was pretty terrifying as far as I was concerned. I could see all of these podcasts that I was watching. I could see people trying their knits on, and you know, being able to try them on as they knitted them to see sort of how they were measuring up. And I was like, that looks like it would be super handy to be able to do. But yeah, the idea of knitting everything all in one piece, I couldn't quite get my head around it. And knitting socks was my first foray into knitting in the round, and I am a massive advocate for the Crazy Sock Ladies channel. I'm actually one of her YouTube membership, and I learnt to knit socks on a magic loop via her tutorials. So it was super handy because, like I say, at that time I was just mainlining tutorials into my eyeballs, but it was just so clear and so brilliant to be able to just pause, play, slow down, rewind, all of the bits that I wasn't quite sure of. And she gave some brilliant tips as to how to prevent ladders when you were knitting on magic loop. And that was my first experience of knitting something that came, sort of as a whole piece, as a tube, basically. And it gave me so much confidence around how it worked in principle, that then knitting other ways in the round, non-magic loop, for example, became, I trusted that process. And it's a bit of a game changer, because, you think about, there were jumpers and, sort of kiddies jumpers that I've been knitting for my nieces and nephews, where, again, I was faced with sleeves that were seamed, and, it gave me that bravery to kind of go, I mean, does it have to be seamed? If I kind of know what I should be doing, can I do it in the round? It turns out you can. Yeah, you can use your own brain. Who'd have thought it? So yeah, that was the big one for me. First of all, was knitting in the round, and I don't love 9-inch circulars. I've recently started exploring their use through these, actually, through doing colourwork socks. So I should probably say this is an adaptation of the Treasure Socks by the Winwick Mum, and I absolutely love the kind of, I see it as like a leaf pattern, but it is my first ever colourwork sock, and it is my first ever standard colourwork full stop. So I was a bit terrified about doing the colourwork down the foot as well, because it's different to the pattern, like to this part of the main pattern, and I honestly thought I'd end up with a pair of socks that I wouldn't be able to get over my feet. So I opted to do it just on the leg, and then to do the rest of the sock normally. So I use magic loop to do the ribbing, but then I switched to 9-inch circulars because I figured it would be easier not having to catch the floats at each end as you would have to with magic loop, so that you don't get these like sort of floats cutting across the inside of the sock. So I've done the colour work there, and I learnt to knit Continental so that I could do this. So there's been like a progression of things. I learnt to knit Continental so that I could use 9-inch circulars comfortably, because I think, I don't know, maybe people will disagree with me, but I'm an English style knitter, and I find that on those tiny needles, because you're constantly taking your hand technically off your right needle to loop the yarn around, I don't know, my hands cramp a lot. So I thought I'll learn Continental for that reason. My preferred method is magic loop, and I don't know if that's because it's my first. I haven't attempted DPNs. That just looks really faffy. I mean, if you like DPNs, then you do you. That's great. I think they look magnificent when people are working on them, because it just looks like some absolute feat of engineering, but they're not for me. I'm quite comfortable that they're not for me, though, because there's different options out there, and that's the great thing about knitting, isn't it? That we don't all have to do things the same way. So knitting in the round is my number one thing that I learnt through knitting socks. My number two is knitting patterns, and more importantly, I would say probably pattern repeats, because I think, sort of when I've done, jumpers and stuff for my nieces and nephews, or hats, or I've followed a pattern. I've just made it up as I go along, because I'm not that good. But it was more about pattern repeats, and I heard people talking about, certain patterns have pattern repeats, particularly when they're talking about cables and stuff like that. And I got to a point where I could memorise, sort of that pattern repeat, and I didn't really understand what people meant by that, and socks taught me that. I found that there's some really lovely sock patterns out there with really great textures, and I've loved just expanding my understanding of how you can take a knit and a purl and a yarn over and create a billion different textures and a billion different looks. But that actually is quite, it's quite a skill to be able to, intuitively be able to read your needing, intuitively know how to read your knitting so that you can see where you are in a pattern repeat and be able to pick it up where you left off. And that's something that I've just got purely through practice, because you are doing that pattern, sort of through quite a decent sized bit of fabric, in all fairness. You do get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, I know what's coming next. And if you put it down and don't touch it for a couple of days, you can see where you are. So that would be another thing that it's definitely taught me, is pattern repeats, how they can create these wonderful textures, and actually how to read my knitting more effectively. Now, the other thing that I don't know that people really massively talk about in relation to socks is my number 3 thing that I learned, which was all around about the construction of a sock. I mean, like, I've been wearing socks for quite a while. I won't say specifically how many years I've been wearing socks for, but it's quite a few. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think until this point, and I don't know, maybe I did with other types of clothes, but certainly with socks, I never once considered, how is this put together? How does this magic thing fit to all the different parts of my foot? It just never crossed my mind until I had to knit a pair of socks, and I had to knit a pair that would fit me, that I would feel comfortable wearing. Side note, my first pair of socks did not fit me at all. I did them in massive needles, and they're gigantic. If you want to see them, go to the Knitting Pot podcast episode 1. You'll find them there. They were a disaster, but they are also some of my most worn socks, because they're just dead cozy. So I hadn't considered how a sock was put together. Certainly hadn't considered how in knitting I could make a sock stay up. That ribbed cuff, for example, wasn't something that I'd considered. Was in the cotton socks that I get, sort of 5 pairs for £5 at Asda. If you don't know what Asda is, you either live further down south and shop in fancy places like Waitrose, or you're not from the UK, in which case Asda is, well, actually for quite a period of time literally was Walmart, but it's basically the same thing. They were owned by Walmart, that's why I say that. I've gone off on a tangent. Anywho, I've never looked at a pair of those socks and gone, how are they put together? But knitted socks, there is a process, and also, like, importantly, the more you knit, the more you kind of go, right, I do the cuff first, then if you're doing cuff down socks, obviously, then I'm going to be, doing the leg, and then it's the heel turn, and that heel turn is like some kind of witchcraft. I don't know how it works. You do some pretty basic steps, and all of a sudden your floppy piece of fabric has turned into something with structure. Like that. It's magic. It is magic. And I've loved learning about socks, and it's actually piqued my interest in other ways as well. So it's not just socks now that I'm interested in. I'm looking at all of my clothes and wondering, how is that put together? And one of my aims for this year is to learn to sew on my machine. I can do some basic stuff, and have done previously, because I hate seaming knitted garments together. So I have zigzag stitched some kids garments together. But I'm paying a bit more attention to all of that sort of stuff, and trying to understand, the different components of lots of different types of garment, be them knitted, be them sewn, whatever it might be. So it's just piqued my interest a little bit more, which I think is quite interesting. It's not just the construction of the sock, though. The other big thing for me in terms of learning, which would be my number 4 I think we're on now. My number 4 thing I learned is stitch construction. So I quite happily went about my knitting, following all of the different hand movements to create my stitches and stuff like that, without ever considering what the yarn was doing and how it was making my knitting, how it was kind of connecting all together, and that made it really difficult then to get a good grasp on, if things went wrong, how could I fix it? Because if you don't know how stitches are constructed, you can't go and find the parts to fix, I guess. So knitting socks gave me an opportunity to make mistakes on a project that, in the grand scheme of things, didn't seem to, if I went wrong, it wasn't so much of a trauma. Like, you know, I hadn't ruined one massive garment that I'd spent hours and hours on. I mean, I had spent hours on it, but certainly they were going to go on my feet. So I wasn't, if there were little mistakes, I could see them, I could try and work out, well, actually, how has that happened? And I could try and put them right. But it wasn't just the mistakes either. I learned about sort of stitch construction and actually where things could go wrong through things like heels. So I learned, and I prefer, a traditional sort of French heel flap and gusset, I guess it's referred to. But I have also done afterthought heels, particularly on like South striping socks, so it doesn't interrupt the stripes. And as a result, I've had to, just the simplest of things, go and pick up the right leg of each stitch to feed through, to secure, so that I can then cut the fabric to then put my afterthought heel in. And that's, you know, sort of, that's probably one of the most useful things I've learned for just generally, if I stuff up and I need to rip back and I haven't put lifelines in, because I'm terrible at putting lifelines in. I probably will do it more on bigger projects if they're patterned or cabled or anything like that. But I'm not great at putting lifelines in. So if I have to go back because I've spotted something is wrong, I know that within stockinette fabric, at least, I'm still not great at being able to see how that would work, either in ribbed fabric or garter stitch, for example. But very often I can get myself back to a point that means that I can correct what I've done wrong, and that's quite empowering, because you just don't feel like you've wasted your time. There's always a way to put it right. So my number 5, can you tell I'm looking at a list over there? I've made a list. My number 5 thing that I learned through knitting was how to pick up stitches. And it seems like a bit of an obvious one, but because you're picking up stitches for the gusset on a sock, and you do it so often, because obviously with every project you do it twice, you know, I suppose, unless if you only have one leg, then you probably only do it once, but typically twice. And you get very good at it, and it becomes very instinctive. And I remember, you know, sort of before sock knitting, I tried to find lots of, you know, the idea of picking up stitches was a bit scary, and everything was a bit wonky as well. I wasn't really very good at it. But again, I think that links to the construction of the stitch, understanding, you know, sort of where you're sticking your knitting needle in to try and pick up a stitch. It actually has to be a stitch that you're picking up, not just something randomly in between, or a little loop of boucle that you've, you know, picked up in error. So again, it seems like a fairly fundamental thing, and maybe it is a fundamental thing, but what a great way to learn it through socks, because you're getting 2 bashes at it, you know, one for each foot. And then I think socks become quite addictive to knit, so you do it again and you do it again, and all of a sudden, before you know it, you're knitting your niece a cardigan that needs a gazillion stitches picking up for a double knit button band, and it's no sweat really, you're quite happy doing it. So that's been a really useful one. I use that so often in pretty much every other type of pattern that I do. So definitely a useful skill. Another one, so number 6, would be some of the basics that, sort of I was having to kind of Google and sort of look for tutorials on things like stitch increases and decreases. Because I could never work out, I knew and I'd heard some people say that, you do an increase this way, a make one right or a make one left, and it's got to be done that way because it changes the direction of the stitch, and that makes sense, but also didn't make sense to me at all. I was just like, well, as long as there's a stitch in there, does it really matter which way it's facing, or which way it's pointing? Because the rest of the garment's all just going to be in that direction. And I realised, obviously, fairly early on that it did make a difference, but sock knitting is what brought it to life for me and made it something that I could visualise and understand, because sock knitting for me, when I was looking at increases and decreases either on the gusset or more importantly on the toe, being able to understand how I would need, which stitches I would need to do, be it a slip slip knit or a knit two together, to create the direction that I wanted my toes to go in. Otherwise, because my toes don't go off like that. Do you know what I mean? That you know how toes look. So that helped bring it to life for me. And somebody also gave me somebody mentioned it on a tutorial, a great way to remember your make one rights and your make one lefts. And it was that for make one right, you're saying to yourself, I'll be right back, so you come in from the back of the stitch. Whereas for make one left, I've left the front door open, and therefore you go in through the front of the stitch. And I don't know why, but that stuck with me, and if that's useful for anybody else, then great. But it's little things like that, through watching various different tutorials and different people's ways of how they remember things, it rubs off on you, and I think that's really cool. What a wonderful way to share knowledge in this community, through the little mnemonics or rhymes or things that you might say that help you remember stuff. So increases for direction was another big thing that I learned, and the importance of it, and more importantly a little way to remember what I had to do to actually create the direction that I wanted. So number 7 is I actually learnt a quicker way to rib. So as an English style knitter, knitting and purling is a bit of a faff, moving between one and the other. But again, this was, and I wish I could remember which tutorial it was that I saw on YouTube where this lady mentioned it, but she mentioned that she has, somebody pointed out she's got an interesting way of ribbing and moving from a knit to a purl, because she actually moves her yarn across before she takes the stitch off the needle. So she either moves that yarn forward or backward depending on whether she needs a knit or a purl. And I thought, well, that seems like a much more fluid motion than what I'm doing. So at the moment I'm knit one, looping around, take it off the needle, pull the yarn to the front, then purl it, and then take that off the needle and then move the yarn back to the front. And I think it's a bit different if you're a continental knitter, but it is quite a slow and laborious process. It's pretty much also the reason why I almost exclusively do 2x2 rib on socks, because I know that 1x1 rib would actually probably work on a lot of socks much better, but I just hate doing it. Having said that, I have found a way to be slightly quicker at it, following this lady's advice, and I will stick some B-roll footage in showing you how I do that, following the method that she uses. And again, if it helps people, then great. It just seems a slightly quicker way of doing it, and all you're doing is moving the yarn for the next stitch, either backwards or forward, midway through the stitch that you're currently making. But that's been really useful for me, because I think I would be put off doing a lot of things if there was 1x1 rib, because I just didn't want that faff and that really laborious process. So it's another great thing that I learned through somebody just sharing their experiences. Now, I've already touched on number 8 slightly because I talked about learning to knit Continental. And this really was for colour work. I knew that I know that my tension was likely to be, because I'm quite a tight knitter, English style, but I knew it would probably be looser on Continental style. I wanted to learn it for a couple of reasons. The big one was actually that I wanted to learn so that I could learn to crochet, because I've tried crochet a number of times, could not for toffee tension in my left hand, and I cursed the fact that I learnt to knit before I learnt to crochet, because I think if I'd learnt to crochet and I'd been able to tension in my left hand because that's how I'd learnt to do it, I could have very easily picked up Continental knitting. But I learnt English style knit first and became incredibly confused by all things left hand tensioning. But I have taught myself a great video from Norman at Nimble Needles, kind of helped me with that, and I'd recommend you going and having a look at that video if you've tried it before and are struggling. It was a simple thing for me that changed whether I was able to do it, and it was something, you know, to do with the finger that my yarn was resting on in my left hand. Just needed to make a slightly different move, but he just explains it beautifully, so definitely have a look at that. But it has opened up the door not just for crochet, but for kind of stranded colour work as well, because you know, particularly if, I mean, at the moment this has been done on 2 colours, so although there's a variety of colours in the sock, it's actually a self-striping yarn. Oh sorry, I just clutter that on the table. It's a self-striping yarn, so as it's going through the pattern it kind of looks like it's fading, but actually it's just the stripe that it's working through. So that as my contrast colour has been in my left hand, and when I do those stitches I'm picking up Continental style, and then the rest of the time I'm just knitting English style with the main colour, the cream colour. And again, that's, you know, it's just about the speed, I guess, and the flow that you can develop when you're knitting. And I don't think I would have learned to do that as quickly if it hadn't been for socks, because the crochet thing is one of those things that's something I want to do, but it's not, you know, knitting is the thing that I love doing, and the desire to knit a colour work sock has been greater than the desire to crochet anything. So I think as well, just like seeing all the different patterns that are out there. There's so many lovely colour work sock patterns, and I think recently I've seen a lot being done because of Summer Lee's year of like colour work patterns that you can purchase, where she does like a different one each month. A lot of people seem to have been doing that, and again, I'm so easy to influence. So I'm just like, oh yay, now I really want to do that as well. So I thought that would be great. The other thing as well is that Kay, the Crazy Sock Lady, has started doing a pair of socks which I'm 100% doing for my brother, because they're massive Nerd Alert socks, and he, I think, will actually really love them. And I can't imagine anything else that I would make him that he would love, but he will absolutely love these socks. But they are a colour work sock, so not only have I got to do massive man socks, I've got such big feet, but I'm going to do it colour work. So I hope he watches this video, and I hope he realises how much effort I'm going to for him, you know, and gets me a really good birthday present as a result. So Continental style knitting, and I've used it in other stuff as well, so again, it's not just for colour work. I've found that I'm getting quite quick at Continental style now, and when I'm knitting in the round, relatively, you know, sort of a decent size circumference, to be honest with you. So I've done a couple of the Oslo hats recently. You know, sort of, I find it actually just quite comfortable just to keep my hands in my lap and kind of knit away in that style. It's not quite so comfortable, I find, when I'm knitting magic loop like this. I don't know why. So yeah, I don't tend to use it unless it's colour. Well, this is the first colour work sock I've done. I can't imagine myself using it on magic loop. who knows, maybe it'll become my preferred style of knitting. But it's just been very useful so far. So where was it? That was number 8. Oh yeah, so actually number 9, this is quite a good one. So and I guess if you do a lot of colour work, this will be common sense to you, but weaving in ends. So this came from sort of scrappy socks, I think, but it became just useful for me through socks, because if I wanted to do like a contrasting heel, toe, cuff, all of those sorts of things, going in and weaving in your ends, nobody seems to love that. Some people find it really therapeutic. It's like, yeah, I finished a project and look, that final end's been woven in. But no, I would rather not have to do them. I learned that the hard way when I made Laura Penrose's Sweet Shop blanket, which absolutely beautiful pattern, a lot of ends to weave in, and I probably should have learned how to do this before I did that blanket, but I didn't, so them's the breaks. But I found a tutorial on how to weave in ends as you go on socks by Natalie, and I recognise it now as how to catch your floats when you're knitting colour work on your socks. But it's the same principle, I think. You're just kind of catching the end instead of a float. And I'll be honest with you, it's a bit of a game changer, because I suppose the thing that I struggled with when I'm changing from one yarn to another for cuffs, heels and toes is that I would have a bit of a loose first stitch on that colour, which was always a bit of a pain, because it was loose at kind of both ends, so like knitting into it and then when you came back round to it again. I'm not explaining myself very well, but it just seemed to have resolved that. So again, weaving in ends, if you don't want to do it at the end of a project, I will link Natalie's tutorial in the video description, so that you can go and find it and benefit from it in the way that I did. So thanks, Natalie, what a legend. And that brings me, I guess, to number 10. So number 10 is all about why yarn choice is important. I mean, I did get a sock yarn as my first sock project. I think I must have read something that said it was important, but I have subsequently done some socks that aren't in a sock yarn and therefore don't have a nylon content in them. And I mean, you can notice a couple of different things, I think. So one yarn I had in particular was advertised as a sock yarn, but was just a quite a hearty, robust yarn. It didn't have the nylon content. I won't mention the name of it because I did not like it at all. And I only made some little shorty socks, and they looked lovely, and it felt super soft in the hand. I'll be honest with you though, there was something weird about it. When I wear them, the only way I can describe it, I don't have particularly sensitive feet. I should probably stress that right now. In all fairness, I've got terrible feet. I won't go into details, but I should probably see a farrier as opposed to a podiatrist. But I can feel the grain of the stitches on the soles of my feet to the point where it's irritating, and it feels like I've been stood all day on something that's going to leave an imprint in my foot, like a knitted imprint. So although this was a wool, and you'd imagine it would be very, very soft, it's not like it was a cotton maybe that's quite a sort of quite a tough yarn, thread, material. Let's call it material. It was like a merino wool, but it just aggravated my feet, something chronic. And I don't know that the nylon brings any softness to a sock. If anything, you would assume it would take away some of the softness of it. But those socks as well have lasted, you know, all of 2 minutes. I'm going to lose a stitch here. All of 2 minutes before starting to get quite threadbare. And that's with me not wearing them a huge amount either, because obviously they become a bit uncomfortable. I really only wear them kicking about the house in my slippers. So for me, I've watched that many tutorials where people had said that the nylon was important, even for people who perhaps don't particularly love having a non-natural element to their yarn. Sorry, cheers. It's a nice wine. So I've watched enough people to kind of go, well, that's probably something that's important. And typically I'm quite a fan of the West Yorkshire Spinners Signature 4-ply. That's what I do most of my socks in. I have done, like I say, socks and other stuff as well. If I'm gifting socks, so for instance, I showed these on one of my podcast episodes, but these are a koi goo yarn and they are 100% merino. They're so soft, they're so lovely. But the person they're going to will have very strict instructions that, you know, sort of don't wear them inside boots, or just be gentle with them because they're not really designed for socks. But I feel quite comfortable why that is, and understanding why it's, you know, sort of important to make the right choices to have a garment that lasts the way that you need it to. And that's not just for socks. At the moment I'm thinking about, okay, there's a jumper that I want to knit for myself. I know what the jumper is, and I just want to make sure it's the right choice yarn now. I want to make sure it has got some cabling on it, so I want to make sure that the yarn choice is one that will really highlight those cables. I want to make sure that it's something that's going to be soft to skin, because it's a fitted jumper, so I'm not going to be wearing anything underneath it. It's just going to be sort of a jumper that I wear, you know, directly on my skin. So it's got to be soft, but so all these different elements add up when you're making your yarn choices. So that's a big thing for me, is understanding why you might choose one yarn over another. And that's been a big lesson that I've learned, again, through my socks. So that was my number 10 reason. I will give you a bonus one though, which is about, I suppose it's linked to the yarn. But the one thing, or one of the things that I have learned, is about how to play with colour. Because these are socks, like I said earlier, they're on your feet, like nobody cares. Like you care, but nobody else cares. So you can get really creative with your colour choices. Particularly, I mean, I work from home, so generally I'm kicking about in hand knitted socks and my slippers. Nobody sees them, which means I can create things that just bring me joy. And I've been able to play with colours, and some things I'm like, oh, you know what, that would work really well in a jumper or a cardigan, those two different colours. I have picked up colours that I wouldn't naturally, you know, sort of waft towards. Weird thing to say, waft towards. But I don't mind on my feet, you know, it's my feet. But I've kind of gone, oh, I do quite like that. Maybe I should make a cardigan in that, or maybe I should make a jumper. Maybe I should wear a hat that's that colour. I've discovered colours that suit me that I didn't realise suited me, and I'm getting more confident with colour. Now, you might be looking at me and going, it's not really a huge amount of colour there, Natalie. You've got a red and white striped top and a denim blue kind of shirt over the top. Trust me, 5 years ago, black, just black. Black with jeans, black with black leggings, black with everything, because, you know, that's just what I wore. And I am becoming much more confident about utilising colour in my wardrobe, and this is all from socks. I don't know, maybe it's age as well and not really caring what anybody thinks in terms of what I look like. But I'd like to think that socks have played a part in it, and just being able to experiment on something as simple and innocent as a pair of socks, that I have discovered some colours that work for me and that I enjoy wearing and bring me joy. So those are my 10 things, including a little bonus, Brucey bonus extra that I've learned from knitting, and hopefully there'll be things that you'll learn as well on your knitting journey. If you are new to knitting and you think to yourself socks are out of your reach at the moment, stop telling yourself that, just go and do it. Do you know what I mean? It's socks, it doesn't matter. If they look like absolute garbage, it's fine. It's a learning experience, you will take a lot away from it, and eventually you'll make a lovely pair of socks that you'll be proud to wear, and then you'll make more, and then you'll make them in pretty patterns, which is exactly what I did. So don't be afraid of them, go and make them. They're fun, they're portable, and you know what, even if you just make loads of odd random socks and wear them as pairs, it's fine. It's feet. It's really not that big a deal. But anyway, I hope this video has been useful. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then please consider subscribing if you don't already. If you do, then thank you for coming back and watching this one, as it's a little bit different. I'll be back for a regular podcast episode at some point. But if you like the video and you like the style of it, the general chit chat, then let me know, because I don't know unless you tell me. So thank you everybody, as they say around here, ta-ra a bit, and I'll see you on the next one.